大イカ、引き立ての抹茶をアメリカで。
Okay, so we've concluded that there is no meaningful benefit whatsoever for organic over conventional produce for the health, being less bad for you or being more nutritious. But what about the environment? Surely organic farming is better for the world. Well, the truth is the answer here is a bit more complex than the nutrition and health one was. We'll get into specifics, but in general, organic food uses anywhere from 25 to 110% more land to get the same yield of food. Organic farming uses about 15% less energy than conventional farming, 37% higher risk of eutrophication with organic farming. So this is where excess nutrients run into local bodies of water, and once it's in the water, algae blooms, killing the other wildlife in the body of water. Both conventional and organic have the same average greenhouse emissions. And finally, organic farming has a higher risk of introducing higher levels of acid to its local environment. Now, the reason that environmental issues with organic are much more complicated is because it actually depends on what type of product you're growing and what type of category of environmental impact you're speaking about, because they're not all the same. The impact of organic fruit production is significantly different in every way than organic vegetable or organic meat or organic oil production. So here's an amazing chart that shows you the type of production and the environmental impact on conventional versus organic for that category. Because we're talking about matcha and we're talking about tea, we're going to be looking at the vegetable category. And based on this, we get some disappointing news. And that is organic vegetable production happens to be the most destructive of all of the categories for organic farming. Organic vegetable farming produces more greenhouse gases. It uses more land. It has more eutrophication. It has more acidification. And interestingly enough, producing organic vegetables is the only organic product that uses more energy than conventional. Right now, based on the current organic technology we have, organic vegetable farming, which would include tea, is worse for the environment in every category than conventional. The solution is not to have only organic or only conventional, but it seems like the best outcome for the environment would be to do a mix of the two, depending on the specific product that's being grown. The organic food market in America is obviously growing every year, substantially, but what about in Japan? Not so much. In fact, in 2022, the entire Japanese organic market was only $1.6 billion. Compare that with the $61.7 billion of America for the same year. If you're in America and you love organic, it makes sense to you. It makes sense just like if you were in Brooklyn and you grew up Jewish and you want kosher food. But it doesn't make sense for the typical farmer to go for organic certification any more than it would to go for kosher certification. Now that could and probably will shift in the future. After all, matcha export is one of the only elements of the Japanese tea industry that's actually increasing every year, while the rest of the market is decreasing. More farmers are going to be incentivized to capitalize on the American interest in organic matcha and thus produce more organic matcha. But today, the vast majority of Japanese tea is consumed domestically in Japan. And in Japan, they don't care about organic. There could be a lot of reasons for this. One reason is simply that there's a lot of trust in the Japanese agricultural system. In fact, the maximum concentration of residual chemicals of Japanese produce is one of the most strict in the entire world, set at 0.01 ppm. In some cases, Japanese conventional produce will have less pesticide residue than American organic, because again, organic doesn't mean that the food has no pesticide residue, only that there's no pesticides used in producing it. But the residue still gets there, and gets there almost as much as it gets it for conventional products.
大イカだよ。
Now, even in the case that an entrepreneurial farmer in Japan decides that they want to start growing organic, there are many challenges and difficulties to do that. I've broken these challenges into three main parts: organic fees and hidden costs, increase in physical labor, and possible reduction in flavor. For a farmer to get USDA organic certification to grow tea, there are going to be many costs that are expected, but also many costs that are hidden and unexpected. Let's go over what the expected costs are. First is soil testing. Second is farm inspections. And finally, there are certification fees. We've kind of covered all these already. And while these are obvious, there are, again, hidden fees. The first is reduced efficiency. Organic farms require larger plots of land to produce the same amount of product, reduced yield. Many farms, especially middle or low-grade farms, have multiple harvests a year. The first harvest is called Ichibancha, the second is Nibancha, and Sanbancha, and Bancha, so it continues on. And many of these farms rely on multiple harvests to make profit. The problem is that organic trees typically have a yield in the second harvest that's 30 to 50% lower than conventional and with an inferior flavor. This means, again, less product and less high quality product they can sell. Buffering time. Like we said, it takes a 3-year buffer to convert a conventional farm into an organic. That is time that they will be spending money but not earning money. Buffer zones. In order to grow organic, you need a buffer zone or barrier between your farm and the non-organic farm. That means either you reduce your land or you need to buy new land that's far away from all the other farmers, which has its own difficulties, which will bring us to less available land in general. See, in order to grow excellent tea, you need certain conditions. Without the use of pesticide, weed killers, and synthetic fertilizers, you have to grow your tea in parts of the country that don't have a lot of pests, where it will have naturally good weather conditions that will produce flavorful tea. Now, these terroirs tend to be the more expensive and rare, limited regions. And if you're trying to grow economical organic tea, you simply can't do it very well on large open plots of land in a valley, which is available. Now, these terroirs that produce excellent tea, you have to have because you can't use synthetic methods to get it in cheap available land. And guess what? These high quality regions that grow excellent tea are very rare and limited. And finally, the obvious one is damaged product. If you don't have pesticides, you're going to have lower numbers of saleable good leaves because insects and bugs will get them. Increase in physical labor. Significantly more physical labor on yourself to harvest and grow organic tea. And with an aging Japanese population of farmers, that's actually a big problem. The first issue is weed removal. You can't use herbicides, so you have to manually, by hand without machine, go out in your field and pull up weeds constantly. And doing this means that you're stooped in uncomfortable positions for long periods of time. It's very physically demanding. Weed growth happens when it's hot. So farmers are going to be out in the field in the scorching sun pulling up weeds when the conventional counterparts don't have to do it as much. Farmers, to avoid the scorching heat, will work in the late afternoon. Of course, this is the time period when the mosquitoes are most active, which, again, quality of life. Now, I should mention, just as a side, the weed issue is actually a really big problem because once the weeds start growing, they start getting the organic, slow diffusing fertilizer in the soil before the tea plants do. So if you don't remove the weeds immediately, the tea is not going to taste very flavorful in the next harvest. And finally is the record keeping. Organic certification requires rigorous and detailed record keeping, which is mentally and physically demanding to keep up on. Possible flavor reduction. I say that it's possible, but not guaranteed. And the reason is there's actually a big distinction between high-end fine tea and fine matcha producers and commercial. And when we talk about the Japanese tea industry, we're primarily talking about the larger commercial aspect of it. The fine tea makers, such as the ones that Ooika sells, are more niche, and they're usually exceptions to many of the rules. So synthetic fertilizers are more rapidly absorbed into the tea plant. Organic fertilizer is slower because the material needs more time to break down into the soil, making less of it bioavailable to the plants. Any weeds that are growing in the field along with the tea plant are going to literally absorb the flavor out of the soil. This means that some of the tea will be less flavorful. Farmers producing organic material will typically choose cultivars or cultivated varieties of the tea plant that have higher yield to make up for the lack of efficiency. But oftentimes the lower yield plants such as acai are the better tasting. Increased bitterness. One of my favorite quotes from a tea farmer I met said to me, "If it tastes good to people, it tastes good to bugs." So with pests being a big problem on tea farms, one of the ways that farmers can mitigate that is to make tea that tastes less sweet, less good to people. And frankly, That doesn't matter if most Americans are going to be using the matcha to make matcha lattes anyway, because the sugar you put into your matcha latte replaces the sugar that's not in the tea itself. One of the most important aspects, period, of producing high-grade matcha is high-quality, intense shading. That shading is literally starving the tea plant of food because you're blocking the photosynthesis, you're blocking the sun. That shading and the starving of the plant creates risk. And with less synthetic options, such as synthetic fertilizer that are readily absorbed into the plant available to the organic farmer, they may simply not want to take the risk of killing their plants by giving it intense shading. This means that the final matcha will not have that intense, rich, shaded taste, which we know as Ooika. It will not be savory like a well-shaded tea will be. Now, a lot of these points came from my conversations with Shimizu-san, who's a 9th generation tea farmer in Uji, who also is one of two families that do organic farming in Uji. What's most interesting here is that the USDA certification for organic is such a burden that many farmers actually exceed the organic qualifications but don't get the certification. For example, Ooika carries tea from Sakata-san. And Sakata-san, who grows the tea that becomes matcha in Uji, in Hamadai, is grown on the bank of a river. That growing region has never had chemicals, synthetic chemicals, applied to it ever in the 300-year history of that farm being there. To understand why Sakata-san and other farmers like him would not bother getting certification, even when they pretty much exceed all organic quality standards, is to simply understand supply and demand. Many of these very high-end elite farmers sell out of the material before the harvest even happens. These farms are tiny. They'll never expand. Uji gets smaller every year. These regions, growing regions, get smaller every year. If all the material sells, why would you go get additional certification that only costs you money and doesn't make you extra money? I'm being a little bit crude here on purpose, but it illustrates a broader point, which is organic in Japan just isn't necessary. But now hopefully you understand why organic tea, specifically organic matcha, is not that common. It doesn't seem to be better for health, it certainly is not better for the environment, and it carries additional costs and significant risks and physical labor for the farmer without any real return on the investment. But it is worth noting that all of this is contingent based on the technology that we have now. It could be, in 50 years, organic is plainly the best farming system that exists, better for health and the environment. Now, with all that said, let's end this video with a final discussion around the case for organic. What's interesting about organic matcha to me is that it comes from the 1,000 years of history. When we drink organic matcha, which typically is more natural and simple in taste, it puts ourselves in the shoes of the monks and farmers of over 1,000 years who drank tea in that style with that flavor profile. By putting ourselves in the shoes of the people before us, there's something that we can discover about tea, but also ourselves today. So that's it. Thank you for watching. I know this would be a little bit of a contentious video. In Japan, organic is not really a conversation. But in America, the type of person who tends to buy organic is also the type of person who tends to drink matcha. So making this video is a little bit, I guess, a risk, because some of the customers at Ooika really do want organic, and I can fully empathize why. And it could be, again, in the future that we start seeing better options for high quality organic matcha on the market. If you found this video enjoyable or helpful, please let me know by leaving a comment below, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks again for watching, subscribing, and liking to Ooika.
大イカです。